Welcome to Perspectives in Mobile, the news podcast from the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. Join us discussing the world of telecommunications, technology, and mobile innovations. From Florence, Ricardo Amati.
The European Commission has just released its long-awaited proposal for the Digital Networks Act, introducing unlimited spectrum licenses for telecom operators, updated rules on interconnection, and voluntary cooperation mechanism with over-the-tops and big tech. This is the MEF Podcast Perspectives. I'm Ricardo Amati. Our guest today is Innocenzo Genna, a lawyer specializing in EU tech regulation and a leading expert on telecom and digital policy. Thank you for joining, Innocenzo.
Hello, thanks for the invitation.
In the next 25 minutes, we'll explore what the DNA, which is the Digital Networks Act, we're not doing biology here, means for telcos, OTTs, and messaging apps, how spectrum and interconnection rules could shape the mobile ecosystem, and what practical advice MEF members should take to stay ahead in Europe's digital scenario. Innocenzo, first of all, could you give us a brief overview from your point of view as a lawyer and an expert of the Digital Networks Act update, let's call it like that, and its main objectives for the EU telecom and digital ecosystem?
Thanks for the question. So the Digital Network Act, that now we refer as a DNA, is a European legislation which will be applicable everywhere in Europe, which has the scope to reform the legislation regarding telecoms, which dates back to 2016 in the current framework, and with the scope to update those rules to the actual state of competition in the telecoms, the state of coverage of fiber to the home and 5G, the trends to new technology, the integration of telecom and cloud, which has an impact important of services which are not specifically telecoms, but they are digital services. So they are not directly regulated, but the regulation is upon their infrastructure. And then they need to create a single telecom market based on pan-European services. It does it by reviewing the current framework, which is basically a code for electronic communication network services, and encompass together other pieces of regulation, especially the open internet regulation regarding net neutrality.
Let's say it was about time, because 10 years today it's really a century in this particular domain. It will be a regulation. The act will be a regulation rather than a directive. Legally is obviously different. How much that change for telcos and over the tops?
Well, in the European context, it changed quite a lot, especially for the companies which are directly concerned, such as the telcos, because having a regulation means to have a more uniform rulebook for all the players across the EU. So without divergent national transposition, so the possibility to have exactly the same rules everywhere, and not to consider how the national member states made the enforcement of transposition in each of their jurisdiction. This should reduce compliance for cross-border services, but especially facilitate the emergence, the development of pan-European services.
Yeah, so that's the context. Let's go to the infrastructure. Let's see how the implications of the infrastructure. The DNA proposes unlimited duration spectrum licenses. This is the headline, isn't it? I mean, from the news point of view, unlimited duration spectrum licenses for operators. How could this transform investment and planning for 5G, 6G, 6G, and fiber networks?
Well, this is one of the most important piece of the proposal, which probably has occupied the headlines of newspapers. In fact, mobile operator have been advocating since a long time better conditions to plan their investments, and especially to have more affordable conditions after the very costly spectrum auction of some years ago for 5G. Well, indefinite unlimited licenses will give telcos more certainty on duration, which is positive for capital intensive market like fiber and 5G. But such unlimited duration is revocable, since the authorities can intervene if conditions are breached, condition attached to the license, or there is a change of policy priority, or there is the need to guarantee a competitive replacement from time to time of the players. So the way these terms of 5 years review and revocation will work must be still further explored. It's something that probably will occupy the time of the co-legislators in the next time.
What it looks important to me is when you say authority, you don't mean anymore the national regulators, but the Commission, isn't it? Who has a veto power over national.
Yes, I would say this remain controversial because yes, this proposal of the Commission to basically concentrate a lot of power in Brussels by way of a veto upon the spectrum measures of member states. It is not the first time that the Commission tries to impose this kind of framework, so this kind of regulatory concentration and coordination. But it's still too early to understand whether the member states will allow it, because one of the co-legislators are the governments, so the council, and I would expect that there must be a majority amongst governments which are not very keen to accept this measure. So let's see what happens. But in general, I would, yes.
I mean, from a legal point of view, a regular, not being a directive, but regulations should be automatically part of the domestic jurisdiction, the domestic legislation, isn't it?
Yes,
Theory.
but when you have you may have a European regulation, which, however, is applied by national authorities. This is like GDPR, for instance. It works like that, or like the Digital Service Act. But here the problem is that spectrum is an area on which member states historically retain their sovereign competencies, because they use spectrum not just for trade, but for a lot of usage of public interest, including
strategic, completely.
Yes. This is why, I mean, probably you can go ahead with harmonization, with some centralization, which, for instance, for satellite can make sense. But I'm very doubtful whether we will get so far as the Commission's believes in this case.
Right. The DNA sets a copper switch-off target, 2035, 2036, with condition of FTTH coverage and affordability. Is this timeline realistic? I'm asking you this question from Italy. As you know, we are not in any way near that objective, that goal.
Well, I think, of course, it's realistic. It's even not that much ambitious, but the reality is that the situation of migration from copper to fiber is very different throughout Europe from country to country. Which there are some countries which are a lot advanced, especially Nordic countries, but you also have Spain and Portugal, which have very good figures. But on the other side, you have country which has a legacy of copper network, like, for instance, Germany and Italy. And there it is difficult to apply a very drastic draconian measures to switch off the copper in a very short time. So due to this different scenario, the decision was to, yes, try to help this transition to fiber to work on the basis of a program by which you can indicate sector by sector in each market when you arrive to certain penetration fiber, and then at certain coverage conditions, then you can switch off the copper, take into account the right of the users, the right and the competitive situation of other operators, and so on. But a mandatory copper switch off has been indicated only on 1st of January 2036, by the way, with some exception. So in order not to touch those divergences between member states. But this said, I think that
It is
everyone will arrive. Everyone will arrive in time. So it's a very long time.
The legislative act aims to create a single market for telecom services, and this will have a practical impact for operators providing cross-border services. One would guess how that impact would impact the operators.
Well, the reality is that the single market for telecom services is a recurring objective in the policy of the Commission and in the debate of operators. But the reality is that operators, apart from some exception, are not really keen on the single market because they continue to plan their investments and their business on the basis of domestic markets. And they see an integration as a scenario which can create an undesirable competition from operators coming from another market. So most of big operators, they talk about single market, but in the reality, they just want to become bigger in their domestic markets. And this is an understandable defense position due to the fact that they want to defend the declining margins.
Right.
But this comes at odds with the objective of a single market, which has been achieved in many areas in Europe, in sectors, but not in the telecoms, which remain very close to the domestic market. And even in the mobile sector, where from the technological point of view, a strong integrations would be possible because thanks to roaming, at the end you may have pan-European mobile services. You can use the same SIM card everywhere, but even there are behaviors by operators which tend to isolate domestic market from others. So this DNA remind that this is an important objective to achieve, but does not provide, in my opinion, drastic measure to arrive there. Of course, it provides for some important stuff like European numbering, some procedure applying for pan-European services, a passport, a European passport in the matter of authorization, everything which is necessary for companies who are genuinely trying to provide pan-European services. But when operators, they don't want to go cross-border, they want to make business in domestic in a domestic market, then this DNA does not create an incentive.
So the DNA put everything in place, whatever an operator would need to be in a single market, but then it's up to the operator will at the end of the day. Licensing changes are meant to encourage investment in fiber and advanced networks. What about competitiveness? Of course, one of the big problems in Europe is competitiveness globally. Do you think that the DNA it's more about regulatory stability, or it is important for competitiveness? Really, is important for competitiveness as well.
Well, regulatory stability is important, but I think that longer durations will reduce uncertainty and the risk for stranded investments, which then should support a larger scale, longer term bets on fiber, 5G, eventually 6G, which we are already talking about. I think all these measures together should, of course, support European competitiveness. But do not forget, this is also a narrative, because at the end, the telecom business remains a local business. So European telcos are not competing with telcos in US or in China. They are completely different markets. So this narrative of competitiveness may be more understandable when you have truly cross-border services which you can find in the internet ecosystems, while telecoms remain something which is closely attached to the territory. So competition is in the domestic market, is not between companies which are playing in different continents.
Anyway, the DNA does not introduce mandatory fair share payments, but it encourages voluntary cooperation between telcos and OTTs. How effective do you expect this framework to be in this direction of cooperation between telcos and over-the-tops?
Well, this is a good question, because this cooperation model guided by BEREC, of course, has the advantage to avoid a network fees in mandatory terms, which is something which have been debated a long time in the last years, and which is basically, let's say, objected and considered not to be feasible in Europe. Still, this cooperation model provides assistance, a structured forum to stay negotiation amongst operators and to issue soft law guidance, like guidelines. So whether it will be effective, whether it will be useful, will depend on whether the parties they will use it in a pragmatic way to discuss traffic management and cost efficiency, for instance, or they will treat it as a new battleground to restart, to litigate whether you can apply the descending party pays principle, but this time with another name, but will be then the same battle. We don't know how will be used, let's say.
For our audience, everybody knows it. But anyway, Innocenzo was mentioning BEREC. BEREC is the European Union agency supporting the body of European regulators for electronic communications, for telcos as well. So about cooperation again, could voluntary cooperation mechanism indirectly achieve outcomes similar to the previously debated fair share?
Well, as I said, in principle not, because this is not a kind of hard law. It's just a mechanism which may give rise to freely and voluntary negotiation and agreements, and eventually soft law by the way of guidelines. However, there might be the risk that even soft law systems or best practices may go beyond the regulatory expectation and could gradually becoming something more binding and move closer to the outcome that were originally envisaged under a mandatory fair share model, which, however, in theory, everyone in Europe, I mean, the most important part of the legislator in Europe have already rejected, because we know that the council, the governments, they said no to fair share, and the parliament did not express clearly, but never was really in favor of fair share. And even the commission at the end, with the change of governance, with the new commission which entered into force with the second mandate of von der Leyen, has abandoned the fair share. So it will be strange that this mechanism give rise to a fair share mechanism. But it is sufficiently vague and imprecise to uncertain to give rise to unexpected consequences in the long term.
So it is expressly vague. In a way, they decided to be vague. And the Commission proposal, talking about interconnection here, open the doors to private networks potentially, in theory. What does it mean for messaging apps and OTT services which rely on a cloud infrastructure?
Okay. Let's firstly explain that when we talk about private networks, we intend networks which are not, which the scope is not to directly bring the services directly to the end users, which are networks which are used for data center or to interconnect other networks amongst them. So even including backbones or data center and so on, networks related to data center. So which now are a big part of the market, because while in the past we believed that we identified the concept of network with private network, with public network, which means the network which bring in the last mile directly to the end user premises. Now the part of these intermediate networks which do not relate directly to the end users, now this part of private networks is quite important in the entire market. So most of those networks are referred to the data center and infrastructure which are used to elaborate services over the networks. Or I would say that interconnection rules will relate to those networks, not directly to the services which are elaborated and provided on top of them. But there is still the risk that because of the convergent narrative, some new legal effect concerning the interconnection of private and public networks may also extend to services to a certain level.
Net neutrality is maintained with updates for specialized services like 5G slicing. What are the implications for premium or differentiated mobile services? Slicing is becoming very common.
Yes, in the current proposal, what we read is that the acquis, so the basic principle are of the net neutrality, so the open internet regulations are fully preserved, but it is given the possibility for the commissions to enact delegated act, so secondary legislations, to specify the conditions under which specialized services can be provided. Intending for specialized services a kind of connectivity product which is tailored on the need, specifically on the need of specific services. So, which means that this could be possible, means could be an advantage for premium or vertical specific services. But in any case, this new possibility cannot be used as a shortcut to get paid fast lines, which can undermine the principle of equal access to the general internet traffic.
Right. Slicing, of course, is paramount for 5G mobile networks that are designed to embrace different services with very different service level requirements. So that's very, very important. About the authorization requirements, the DNA extend them to cloud providers and CDNs. What that would, I mean,
Well,
significant
this is a part of the DNA which are still analyzing.
Right.
Probably create a lot of attention during the legislation process. But according to the draft which we have seen now, there is effectively the news that the scope of the authorization regime is extended to digital and internet infrastructure, which is something which goes beyond to the current regime, which limits the need for general authorization just for real, genuine telecom infrastructures. So the consequence of that telecom authorization will be needed not just for ordinary telecom infrastructure, but also for infrastructure which are referred for the provisions of content and internet services, such as, for instance, CDN and cloud infrastructure and so on. The consequence of that is that those operators managing those infrastructure will become subject to the supervision of telecom regulators. This is quite an important development. It has some I can understand it because in the current market now there is a strong integration of those infrastructure, whether for transmission or for storing or for elaborating services. So if authorities want to tackle specific phenomenon, for instance, harmful content, it's not effective to be able to tackle some infrastructures on the basis of a given regime and not to be able to do the same on other infrastructure which are closely interlinked. So I understand the merits of this regulatory development. Of course, I see the risk of an overregulation, and that is why this process should be monitored. In any case, we are talking about infrastructures and not about the pure OTT or messaging platforms which are provided on the top of that.
Mhm.
However, I suggest to monitor very closely the legislative process.
The problem could be too much rules. About the DNA provides this proposal provides spectrum harmonization, but wholesale roaming caps remain unchanged. So the question again, going back to the problem of European single markets in general, would Europe's mobile market will it remain fragmented, or this proposal may help the market in reducing its fragmentation?
Well, as I told before, the DNA proposal still indicates the achievement of single market as an important objective. However, it does not provide for concrete measures to push the operators towards that objective, considering that operators are quite reluctant to do it because their business model is normally relying on the domestic market. This means that it's not sufficient to make some harmonization or to reduce some cross-border obstacles to convince operators to start cross-border businesses. There should be something there which really incentivize the cross-border activity. And there is nothing about that in the DNA. One possibility was to reform the wholesale roaming system in order to make possible for mobile operator to provide a sustainable cross-border business throughout Europe without getting losses, because in the current roaming regime, operators, they cannot make a sustainable business everywhere in Europe because after some time they're going to get losses because the cost of roaming at the wholesale level is much higher on the average retail tariffs. So they are somehow obliged to continue to maintain the focus of their business in the domestic market. And this means that just reducing some cross-border obstacles does not change this business situation. So at the end, nothing has changed there. The roaming reform is not in the DNA, and therefore mobile operators will continue to structure the business on domestic basis, providing cross-border services only to the user when they are temporarily wandering, traveling in Europe, but without the possibility really to provide a permanent cross-border services, which makes the European market to be a unique market and not a sum of different fragmented markets.
Innocenzo, wrapping up what we said, what advice would you give to MEF members, let's say mid-size operators, mobile leaders in different domains? How can they navigate if these proposals are accepted? For example, what practical steps should be taken now to leverage unlimited spectrum licenses and plan fiber 5G investments strategically? Do you have an advice to give?
Well, you have to follow the legislative process and knowing how it works in Europe, which is a bit different from the experience operators have in national parliaments. In Europe, the legislative process works in a way that there are two co-legislators, the council and the parliament, having different characteristics because the council is led by presidency and it represents the government, while the parliament are the member of the parliaments, which are various hundreds of people which are organized by parties. So the way you approach them is completely different. So you must be able to follow those co-legislators. At this stage, you have to be represented normally by a trade association or anyway, somebody who can represent the sector in an holistic way, because at this point it's very difficult for a single company to be considered significant in front of the co-legislators. They want to see the organization, or anyway somebody who is really representing an entire sector, not a single company.
So trade associations like as MEF, they have a role which is
They could have a role if you can show that you represent members having some homogeneous interest. Of course, yes, you can represent them. You have to consider how to deal with the council, how to deal with the parliament, and consider also the timing, because the more the negotiation advances, the less is the room to propose something, because the more you go ahead, the less you can propose new amendments, and the more you just concentrate on a compromise of existing piece of legislation.
How long will it go ahead? Do you have a prediction? How long they will discuss it before defining?
It depends on how much difficult is the negotiation. Firstly, within the co-legislators, which means the parliament, the council respectively, because they have to agree internally on their position, and then their respective positions are negotiated reciprocally with assistance of the commission. The first part can last various months, but even 1 year or even more when the file is particularly difficult. And this file may be difficult, especially in the spectrum part, because I expect for spectrum many governments to have divergent views. And then if you add on that the trilogue procedure, which is made of the Commission and Parliament Commission, Council, Parliament, Commission to negotiate together, then it will take 6 months, or something like that. So I would say that the entire process may last up to 18 months, but my advice is to intervene at the beginning and not at the end.
That's very clear. For messaging apps and OTTs, again, an advice for MEF members here. How can they navigate potential new oversight, the general authorizations we were talking about, and voluntary cooperation without limiting their business, which is innovation?
Well, I think messaging apps and OTT should first clarify, on the basis of an analysis, whether and how they fall within DNA, new scope or extended authorizations or new interconnection regime. So on the basis of this analysis, they should then engage eventually in this activity of relation to the co-legislator to explain to which extent this application to them of the new rules is justified or not. And then they should engage in the subsequent activities when the DNA will be approved. So in all the consultation and further activities led by BEREC or by national regulators and consultancy. So in order to providing all the documentation and technical and economic evidence which are useful to help them to resist creeping obligations or de facto network freeze, without stepping back from constructive traffic engineering and resilient solutions.
Innocenzo, give me a headline, okay, if you can. What would be the single piece of advice for MEF members, again, to stay ahead in this changing scenario for telecoms?
Well, I think that we are clearly the convergence is gone ahead. So there are some rules which in the past were considered um, a problem for other kind of operators, not for MEF members. I think that this world is changing. You are part of a convergent ecosystem, so be ready to be regulated more than in the past, and therefore you have to approach this new scenario in a very professional way, being ready, making proper analysis in the timely moment, and be ready to intervene in front of the authorities, whether legislative authorities or enforcement authorities, in a proper and timely moment.
Innocenzo, thank you for your insights. Innocenzo Genna, a lawyer specializing in EU tech regulation and a leading expert on telecom and digital policy. Thank you very much for talking in this podcast, Innocenzo.
Thanks for the invitation, and I hope to have been helpful to you.
You certainly are helpful, Innocenzo. For members and listeners, the DNA will be a defining framework for Europe's mobile ecosystem in the years ahead. I'm Riccardo Amati. Stay informed, stay connected, and keep innovating. Good luck with your work.
Thanks for listening to Perspectives in Mobile. Join us next as we explore telecoms, technology, and mobile innovations. Stay tuned, stay connected, and let's unlock the mobile potential together.